Hello, my friends. My name is Geza Tatrallyay. I'm a poet and an author. With my latest thriller, Arctic Inferno, 16 of my books have been published by different publishers in the USA, Canada, and India. So 6 thrillers, 5 poetry collections, 3 memoirs, a short story collection, and a children's picture storybook. And another poetry volume and a murder mystery will be published probably now in 2024. My poems, short stories, and articles have appeared in journals, magazines, and anthologies in Canada and the USA. I was born in Budapest, Hungary, and escaped with my family in 1956 during the Hungarian Revolution, immigrating to Canada the same year. That is the story I tell in my very first memoir, For the Children. I grew up in Toronto and attended the University of Toronto schools, where I was school captain. From there, I went to Harvard University and graduated with a BA in human ecology in 1972. But halfway through Harvard, I took a break from my studies to work as a host at the Ontario Pavilion at Expo 70 in Osaka, Japan. And the experience there led me to write my second memoir, The Expo Affair. I was selected as a Rhodes Scholar from Ontario to go to Oxford University and graduated from there with a BA, MA in Human Sciences in 1974. I then spent a year at London School of Economics and Politics and graduated from there with an MSc in 1975. I represented Canada as an épée fencer in the 1976 Olympic Games in Montreal, where I helped a Romanian-Hungarian fencer defect to Canada. And this is the story in my third memoir, The Fencers. I've worked in government, international organizations, finance, and environmental and entrepreneurship. I officially retired, though, in 2004, but have been managing a few investments, mostly in the clean energy sector, and devoting myself to my family and my writing. I'm a citizen of Canada and Hungary, and currently divide my time between Barnard, Vermont, and San Francisco. My wife, Marcia, and I together have a daughter, Alexandra, who lives in San Francisco with husband David and 2 sons, Sebastian and Orlando, and a son, Nicholas, who lives in Nairobi with his Hungarian wife, Fanny, and his daughters, Sophia and Lara. So I first wrote and self-published Arctic Meltdown, the first book in this Arctic series, as an ebook in 2011. As I was becoming concerned already then with the impact of climate change on the North, and particularly the melting of the polar ice cap. My son and I took a trip to Greenland that year, and I was shocked with the rapid calving of some of the glaciers, and equally importantly, that the main hotel in Nuuk, the capital, was full of Chinese businessmen, there to try to extract leases on Greenland's extensive natural resources. I also noted from my research that there was, and still is, no comprehensive treaty governing the Arctic, and only the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea delineates the territorial waters of the several Arctic countries. Russia, though, has historically held to what is known as the sectoral principle, which says that everything from one end of their country to the other, and right up to the North Pole, is theirs. And they were already then strengthening their military capability up there to enforce this. Black Opal Books was kind enough to agree to publish a revised and updated edition of Arctic Meltdown in 2021 in both print and ebook formats. And through ACX, I also brought out an audio version with a view to maximizing the reach of the message. And since both climate change and the militarization of the Arctic have only been getting worse since then, I wrote Arctic Inferno, the current book that I'm talking about, in an effort to bring even more focus to the issues that these books tackle, and also strengthen the environmental component. While in today's world, an Arctic treaty is unfortunately not likely, the series ends on the hopeful note that one is actually signed. So the ideas for my books generally come from my own life and how that intersects with the world all around. For example, for the 2 Arctic books I'm talking about, probably the idea already started to germinate in college. One summer, I worked up in what is now Nunavut in the Canadian Arctic and fell in love with the far north. I already saw then how this sensitive environment is impacted by man's activities. And that was partly what led me to study with Professor Roger Revelle at Harvard, who was one of the first to draw attention to global warming way back then already. This all was gestating when in the early 20-teens I was struck by the dangers facing the Arctic environmentally, socially, politically. So writing tends to be my default activity whenever Marcia and I are not up to something, or I'm not on call with the grandchildren, or not having to manage our finances. I turn to writing or promoting my books. As I mentioned, the first edition of Arctic Meltdown was the very first book I published as an ebook. I had sent it around to publishers and agents, but no one picked it up then, so I self-published an e-version on Smashwords in 2011 because I felt the message needed to be out there. All my other books since then, including my 5 poetry collections, have been published by traditional publishers, albeit small or medium, in the USA, Canada, and 1 poetry collection actually in India. So normally for my thrillers and memoirs, I do a lot of research, and certainly a great deal of research went into the 2 books in the Arctic series. In fact, as I mentioned, in 2011, I went on a research trip to Greenland with my son to understand a bit more the impact climate change was having on the environment and the traditional Inuit way of life up there. This, of course, led to further research to understand what was behind this and where this interest was going. Clearly, also the opening up of the new trade routes, the Northeast Passage, led me to research the entire law of the sea and how countries claim additional offshore territory, and that this is all governed by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. This led to learning about the several competing claims for additional seabed up there and the entire Russian stance and militarization of their Arctic coast. It was actually putting all this together that led to the idea for Arctic Meltdown, the first novel in the series. The second book, Arctic Inferno, grew out of the realization, as I said, that since I first brought out Arctic Meltdown as a self-published ebook, things had only gotten a lot worse. And in fact, there's heightened potential for conflict now in the Arctic. And there's an even greater need for an Arctic treaty along the lines of what governs Antarctica, and what Hanna Christensen, the heroine of the 2 novels, and Pavel Laptov, the Russian Arctic explorer in the book, who turned politician, engineered. So the plot largely grew out of the research and took on a life of its own as I started writing, and the characters got developed as the plot moved along, and new ones came alive as and when needed. Arctic Meltdown is the perfect title for the first book because it arose out of concern for the melting polar ice cap. Meltdown also connotes the destructive fraying of any semblance of order there was up there. Arctic Inferno works well as a title also. The Arctic is heating up at least 4 times as fast as the rest of the world with climate change, and the international political situation up there is getting worse too, as both Russia and China are increasing their military presence up there. I love my main character, Hannah. She's intelligent, beautiful, talented young lady. I wanted to make her a bit out of the ordinary by introducing her lifelong intimate relationship with her friend Christy, which doesn't prevent her from falling in love with Richard Simpson, the Canadian diplomat. So the ideal reader for my book is someone interested in the international political, social, and economic implications of climate change. Much of the book takes place in and around Greenland, where the polar ice cap is melting at a rapid pace, which is forcing the local Inuit to adapt quickly. Also, an ice-free Arctic Ocean is opening up trade routes and natural resources coveted by the superpowers, some of which, as I said, like Russia, have already largely built their military capability in the north. So I want my readers to gain a greater understanding of what is and could happen in the Arctic, and what might be one way to resolve the increasing devastation and possibility of conflict up there. I'm glad to see that in the press there is now at least some acceptance that there's a real threat both from climate change and the resulting militarization of the Arctic. So if you're interested in all of this, my books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, other online purveyors, and through most bookstores. They may need to order the books through Ingram, but it's you have to just tell them to do that, and they can get it. Now, I'm still working on doing more writing. I just finished the manuscript of a murder mystery series set here in Vermont. It is again based on some current realities here, and has a first-person protagonist find the corpse of a murdered woman with a bowie knife in her chest in a purple school bus parked in a snowy lot in Vermont. The book takes off from there, and that is actually the subject of one of the short stories in my book, The Mind Spins, and that's what was the genesis for this book. So the book takes off from this story as the protagonist tries to find out who the woman was that he found and who might have murdered her. It is a fun book and one which would make a great movie, I think. So I think if you want to become a writer, you just need to keep at it. I find it to be great fun. Plus, you really learn a lot along the way. Not just about the world out there through the research you might do and the reactions to what you put out there, but more importantly, perhaps about yourself. Writing, for me, was always an act of self-discovery. One makes lots of choices along the way, not just regarding what you write about, but how you shape your plot and characters. As I say, it is a lot of fun. So, I try to read all the reviews that I get for my books, especially the more extensive ones, and those are the ones I might learn something from. So I'd ask all of my listeners out there, please do a review if you can, and post it on Amazon and other sites such as Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, BookBub, and others. But thank you for listening, and have a good day. Bye-bye.